Welcome to episode 1, Marlins Uncorked, with me, Peter Pratt. Welcome to the show. First ever episode. We are going to be covering 4 months worth of Marlins content in a single episode, the launch episode. It's free to air. Make sure you hit subscribe everywhere you get your pods and on YouTube to Marlins Uncorked. And of course, I couldn't do this without the UK GOAT, Shaun Barrett, also in the house on episode 1, Marlins Uncorked. Let's go. Welcome, Shawnee B. Welcome. It's been a while. It definitely has been a while. Firstly, welcome to the show, episode 1. How are we feeling?
I'm looking forward to this, Pete. This is another new venture that you've brought me into that I'm sure we will grow into. It's been a long time since we spoke over Zoom for sure. So be interesting to see how this goes. And bizarrely, a lot of news to break down. No real major player to announce, but plenty more going on around the organization.
No doubt about it. Like you said, it's been a while since we've hit an episode together. It's been a while since I've hit any episodes. Firstly, it's the 10th of Feb. Baseball is back. Super Bowl is done. The NFL's cooked. Done. It went out in a bit of a whimper, actually, to be honest with you. The game was a damn squib. Halftime show, mixed reviews from what I've seen and heard. So NFL, definitely in the bin for now. MLB season, pitchers and catchers reporting like imminently. So, of course, that means we need a new show. And we're back. Delighted to see Jeremiah hitting it up on Locked Up Marlins, by the way. So, congrats to Jeremiah for that. Firstly, some housekeeping on Marlins Uncorked. What is this show? What should you expect from the show? I think that's the important thing. And then we'll kind of lean into 4 months worth of Marlins news with me and Shaun. So, firstly, I just wanted to call out Marlins Uncorked. It's a multi-episode a week show. Minimum 3 episodes is the commitment from me. And one of those episodes will be free to air. Podcast, YouTube, wherever you get it, wherever you enjoy it, it's there. The rest of them are going to be available to Patreon subscribers only. So if you want more than 1 a week, then that's where you got to go. It's a monthly subscription. There's an offer, actually. I even snuck an offer in there. The first 30 members will get a £3 a month subscription. I think that equates to like $4 and a bit. I don't know, $4 or $5, whatever it is. Either way, once that's gone, we revert back to the standard price. But fundamentally, guys, it is a subscription-based model for if you want the bonus stuff. If you're happy with 1 a week, it's free. That's fine. Why am I doing it? Why does anyone pay for pods? I don't know. I personally have never paid for any podcasts, by the way, so I just want to call that out. And why is it a paid pod? Well, firstly, there's costs to cover. I just want to call that out, like to produce this and to host this and to do everything associated with podcasting. There are costs that need to be covered. Secondly, it's a motivator. It's a motivator for me to make sure that I keep pushing the ticket, to make sure that I'm engaged and I just don't freewheel it and just pump stuff out there. Because listen, if you guys see value in this content, then you'll subscribe. And if you don't, you won't. And so that's the one for me. I want to make sure the content is A+. So my commitment is 1 a week, free to air. The rest, via Patreon. I'll share the links. The links are in the bios. The links are connected to everything. So head over to Patreon and find Marlins Uncorked there if you want to. With that being said, there's going to be guests. There's going to be shenanigans. There are no ads on this show. There are no PG ratings either. That's the other thing to call out. And so it might get a bit spicier maybe than Locked On at times, which probably means that Alex Contreras can be invited back on and Takes Were Made can be invited back on, and maybe even Alex Ferrer, the new Marlins beat writer, it seems. Alex Ferrer breaking news now about the Marlins signing backup catchers. I mean, boy, what does the world come to? That is the void. That's what's happened this offseason. Alex Ferrer breaking news, unbelievable scenes. So that's the housekeeping out the way, guys. This is episode 1. This is free to wear, and we are rolling. The UK GOAT, Shaun Barrett, is in the house. So, Shaun, I was writing down some notes here about the Marlins off-season thus far, and the other housekeeping thing. I took at least, I think it was more like 5 weeks. I took 5 weeks off Twitter as well, from the back end of December, right pretty much through January. I was worried I was going to miss loads of Marlins stuff. I think in reality, I missed pretty much nothing in that period, which is kind of indicative in some ways of this offseason. But when I was listing down things, there's been a ton of things that have happened. It may not specifically relate to marquee free agent signings or trades that are going to impact the big league roster right now, but tons has happened. I wrote down a list. However, Shaun, for you, what has stood out this offseason? When you think back to the 2024, 2025 offseason, however we phrase that, what stood out to you in terms of what has changed or what has happened for the Marlins this offseason?
I think it would be a mistake not to say that the biggest thing that's happened this offseason is that nothing has happened as far as adding money to the organization on the field. I mean, every single announcement that happened when you were away on your little hiatus was just filled with comments afterwards. It's on the Marlins curve of information. The number of eyes on it aren't as much as, say, the Yankees or any other team. But for the Marlins, the amount of comments on all these posts were where's the free agents? Where's the team getting its players from? So, yeah, it's been a super quiet off-season, especially after the off-season before, where it was just Tim Anderson that was added as far as real Major League money. You see the rankings where you've got the last 2 off seasons, money total spent on players. The Dodgers are at the very top with 1.something billion, which I can't quite remember now, but I'm pretty certain the number was slightly higher than the cost of the purchase of the Marlins.
Oh my days!
And then at the very bottom, you had the Miami Marlins, 30th with $5 million over 2 off seasons.
Is this the Peter Bendix MO now? Like, is this what we should expect from Peter Bendix in off seasons now? I mean, we've had 1 3/4 at this point. We have Tim Anderson to show for that in terms of free agents added. Granted, the team was poor in 2024. Is this what we should expect? Firstly, is this the MO? And equally, is this what you expected? I know we're kind of looking at it now going, okay, this is where we are, but is that what you expected in terms of activity from Bendix this offseason?
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. There's no surprise for me in the way that this has been. This is what a rebuild looks like. Marlins fans should recognise it because they've been through enough of them. The team were very clear, not by the words that they used, but by the actions that they took, that this rebuild was going to happen. And we've seen that they finished, well, they didn't finish dead last, but they finished last and getting the first pick. That didn't quite go so well at the draft, or the draft pick.
The lottery.
The lottery. They've clearly put out there that they want to be a lottery team that year and a lottery team the next year. You can only do it twice. So if you're going to do a rebuild, you might as well do both. There's no point messing around. So I expect them to be there or thereabouts the worst team by record in 2025, which doesn't sound like an exciting proposition for starting a brand new podcast about it, but it's certainly going to be exciting. And this coming year, I'm far more excited for this coming year than I was for last year. And the reason for that is because what we had last year to get excited about, before X started to show that he's a major league star, before Otto Lopez and was starting to show that he can also be that, the only thing we had was all the players that we can get excited about are either injured for the rest of the season or they're going to leave shortly.
Yeah.
Whereas now they've done that. Obviously, got Sandy to go as well at some point. But there are now players inside this organisation that are at the Major League level or coming to the Major League level this year that actually will be the grassroots for the next team that will look to compete.
I think that's a really interesting observation, and it's a really interesting fan aspect where at this juncture now, it's stripped down other than Sandy. And where fans start to form now and start to kind of gravitate towards is, okay, which are the guys that I'm going to start to connect with? Who am I going to start to cheer on? Who's going to become my new favorite player? Because it's no longer the fear of, well, when's Jazz going to be gone? When's Berger going to be gone? When's Luzardo going to be gone? Any of these things, they're gone. They're gone. Everyone that's here now is effectively on league minimum. And so the reality is, as we know by this business model, the reality is these guys are going to be around for quite a few years now if they actually can prove their ability at this level. So I do think that's a different experience as a fan, and one that we're familiar with. This is kind of where I came into the Marlins in some ways, where it was just at the back end of that window that never really became a window because they were just 2 arms away. And obviously all the stuff with Jose, et cetera, and then obviously the sale of the team, the rebuild fully kicked in. That was where I started. And I kind of started in a rebuild and then quickly attached myself to all sorts of prospects. The amount of hype that I must have, there's receipts galore on Twitter. The amount of hype I must have invested in JT Riddle must be insane. There's so many pro JT Riddle tweets. He was absolutely terrible, but I didn't care. I wanted JT Riddle to be good. He wasn't. Brian Anderson obviously was a big fan favorite too. Everyone was all in on Brian Anderson. The funny thing is with that, I think it's a really interesting point where Brian Anderson in that Marlins rebuild looked good and looked like a player. The problem was, as soon as Brian Anderson wasn't with the Marlins, it transpired actually he wasn't really much of a player. The Marlins were effectively a AA, AAA squad, and Brian Anderson was the best of a bad bunch, which it was fun anyway. We all enjoyed Brian Anderson. No, not trying to hit to slander him, that's for sure. But a good call out. It's a different watching experience following prospects from the start, and that's effectively where we're at. Who's caught your fancy now? When lineups announced, and you've got 40 man to work with here, I guess. But when the lineups announced, I think we got a sense of what the 26 man's going to look like in some ways. Who's getting the Shaun Barrett juices flowing? Which position player stands out to you? That's who's your new Coop? I guess is the right way of phrasing it.
It's a hard position to fill, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's going to be difficult. I don't think the player's quite there yet. X and Otto are both very good players, and they will be high up in my regard as far as players. But I always do like that under the radar, unloved player. If you've got an above 100 WRC plus, I'm probably not going to like you.
Okay.
Or I'm not
You're
going to
too good. You're too good for Shaun Barrett.
So I Jonah Bride at the moment still, I know we gave him quite a bit of stick on one, I think it was 1 or 2 podcasts in a row. That looking back on maybe were a little bit unfair to him. But
he's not been returning my DMs either, Jonah Bride. I don't know why, but those 2 episodes do stand out.
But I think he's the kind of player that for me is that guy that can just do enough in spots. He's going to a walk off here or a big home run in a big moment. Those are the kind of things that will get some excitement going for me. And I think it is a case of, look, we know this team is going to be very good, but there are some bright sparks, and there are players, a bit like what Miggy Rowe did when through the last rebuild, where if you do just enough, all of a sudden you do become that fan favourite. Just by the very nature that you've got to root for somebody to have some success. And obviously we want the young guys to do that. and we want the prospects to work their way through. But I always do like that aged player that's just, he's probably hitting 6th or 7th, and he's just doing enough and giving you those big moments from time to time. The player that you're not expecting much from, so that when you get it, it's a big buzz.
Yeah, it is. I think that's kind of how Miggy Rowe, became Miggy Rowe in many ways, where he was given the opportunity, he put full effort in, and he was just a grinder at that point. I wanted to maximize and eke out all amounts, whatever talent was there in the tank. Miggy Rowe was just trying to squeeze that out. And frankly, there's a lot of them guys knocking around this roster at this point. And some of them are young, some of them are, slightly older. I mean, the average age of this Marlins roster must be 24 or something. It feels like it's predominantly young rather than old. I tell you a name that, speaking about, names and, you mentioned X and Otto. Every time I put a tweet out at the moment linked to anything about players, everyone's going to the same guy right now. That guy is Connor Norby. He's become the hopes and dreams, it feels like, of the Marlins fan base right now. That's how I'm sensing it, generally by the way the engagement's going on Twitter and whatever. So I'm just interested to get your take around Norby. Where you see him, how good you think he is right now. Granted, what we've just said, the roster isn't loaded with talent. There's going to be guys that emerge. And are we expecting Connor Norby to be that type of guy that's going to emerge and be a production leader, let's say, for the Marlins in 25 and beyond?
I think his growth into the lineup could be very similar to the player you mentioned earlier in BA.
Yeah, I was thinking the same too, actually. I was thinking exactly that as I said it. Sorry.
And I think, obviously, we know with the trade, having both players come over, I think Norby, obviously, we know is the guy that we're expecting some actual talent from. But yeah, he's an interesting player. I mean, obviously, there's some pop there, and you hope that you can get the average up to sort of like a 280. Although, obviously, batting average is exactly a great definition of a player. But he is that one player that is here now. It's not like a Ramirez or De Los Santos who are going to hopefully try and break into the team at some point through this year. He is here. He is going to get every single at bat he can get at the major league level with this team. So he's kind of like the test of the first test of this rebuild. What can they do? And what, if he flames out, it's all of a sudden you're already scrambling at the beginning of this rebuild. So there is a lot, I wouldn't call it pressure, but there's a lot riding on his shoulders for the Marlins to make a good start to this rebuild. And despite the win-loss record, it doesn't really matter. If he has a good season, that's, what's the difference if they win 70 games or 60 games? It doesn't really matter. If Connor Norby has a good season, a good growth season, he's going to turn 25 in this year. So he's not young anymore, but you can't call him a young player. He is entering his prime. And as a player that only has 45 major league games last year under his belt, you're expecting this is going to be his first full season at 25. We need to see some results clearly.
Is he starting at third base every day, in your opinion?
Has to be. Absolutely has to be. I mean, that will be the bulk of his season. If he starts 150 games, I'd like to see 120 at third base.
Yeah. Are you expecting Xavier to be at shortstop as well?
I think so. I think he mentioned in the offseason that one of the things he wanted to do was improve his defense. I mean, Otto can play pretty much anywhere, so they're interchangeable. But X is obviously going to want to play shortstop. That's, when he goes into the arbitration room, because let's face it, there's not going to be any extension anytime soon. When he goes into that arbitration room, shortstop over second base is going to be worth probably a couple of $100,000 a year to him. Yeah,
exactly. Of course, it's the premier position, let's say, and if you can play it well, then that really helps both him financially and be clearly the Marlins too, which Skip put kind of full faith in Xavier last season. Obviously, it's a heavily analytically driven organization now at this point. And so if the analytics were kind of saying, listen, we like X at shortstop, then who am I to question that? And I think he did okay. I think he in parts did a little bit better than expected. And I think in parts, some of those potential issues, I think, did surface now and again. And so, to your point, X will want to play there. I don't really see anyone displacing him at this point. His bat's going to be in the lineup. And so, I think you can confidently have X, trotting out at shortstop pretty much every day. Sounds like Otto Lopez is going to be playing second base a ton. I guess that leaves Norby at third. So that becomes, a good chunk of your infield. And then, first base, we'll see. I do think first base is an interesting one. I didn't plan to speak so much about first base, but while we're here, we may as well. Obviously, you've already talked about Jonah Bride. We slandered him in a few episodes on the previous podcast, but, that is what it is. It's a new year right now. It's a new podcast. So let's give some love to Jonah Bride. But equally, there's some emerging names in that position area that I think is the other interesting wrinkle of first base. And that's the main, when you think about the infield, the Marlins infield, I'm looking at first base this season particularly because, listen, if Jonah Bride doesn't start great, then there's going to be other people really pushing. And listen, we're going into spring. There's no reason why Justin Ramirez, Davison De Los Santos, plus others could make a huge impact in spring and just force their way onto this roster. Who's to say? But when I think about position battles, infield group, for me, first base really stands out. Clearly, Bride owns it right now. But considering all these guys are effectively like waiver claim little deals, there is no loyalty. There is no need for loyalty. You have zero investment in these guys. And as good as they can be for 2 months, you can move on just as quickly and you've lost nothing. Play the hot hand. So how are you seeing first base, both in spring and kind of as this season rolls on?
Yeah, I think in the ideal world, Bride takes it and runs with it. But you're right that there are so many people. We got Ragaman at third. Presumably he can place him first. De Los Santos, I know there's a lot of hope for him. I still think with the way that the Marlins are run, even if he has a good spring, even if he has a good start to his time down in the farm, he's turning 22 this year. I don't see the massive need to hurry. We don't need to see him at the major league level to help the team in getting wins. So I think that even if he doesn't need much more seasoning, which I presume he probably would, the team are going to tell him, we're going to give you some more time to get seasoning because we're not going to start that clock straight away. And then you've got Matt Mervis, who's on the 40-man, and then you've got Martorello and the never-ending story of Troy Johnston. So there's a lot of interest, and I think you're right as far as will they, won't they, as far as making the roster, make the lineup. First base is, because obviously when you say first base, you also automatically think DH as well. These are the kind of players that are going to be fighting for those roles. I think you're right that second, short, third are all locked up. There's some more interesting battles in the outfield. There's not many people that have locked down their spots. So between first base and outfield, I think they're the spots where you're looking. Backup catcher as well, obviously. But how exciting can you get about backup catching on a team that's going to lose 100 games? So I think a pulse and a catcher's glove is all you need to be the backup catcher for the Marlins next year.
But I've got to be honest though, there is some interesting evidence, I would say, linked to the backup catcher right now that I think does connect to the farm and to trades last year. And what I mean by that is, obviously I haven't been doing a show for a few months, but one of the things that has occurred in that period is the Rule 5 draft. And the Marlins did make a selection. That selection was Liam Hicks. Not quite certain what happened in and around the draft. It felt like they went to draft him and then went to trade him, or something was going on, but it didn't end up happening. But nevertheless, the Marlins right now, Liam Hicks was selected as a Rule 5 selection. It means he has to remain on the 26-man roster all season, effectively. I think that's a really interesting wrinkle here because as we headed into this offseason, a lot of buzz clearly around and Agustin Ramirez. Big name in a big trade. Jazz Chisholm Jr. going the other way. Agustin Ramirez, a lot of people hyping this dude at the time. Felt like he was a helium prospect is how I'm going to describe him at the time. Kind of came out of nowhere, but was having a great season. And the way it was positioned and sold was, we have a catcher that is almost big league ready and can hit. The question marks were, is the guy a catcher? At the time, I've covered that in a lot of depth previously. We then come to this offseason. We then get the Marlins making a Rule 5 selection of effectively a backup catcher, blocking Agustin Ramirez in reality. And I think that is a really, really interesting indicator here about how the Marlins are feeling about Agustin Ramirez, either A, his timeline, or B, his catching ability. It might be that this is just, we know this season's going to be not a good one. Let's leave Agustin Ramirez to work on his catching away from the big league club. Let's not burn service time, etc., etc. It could be that. Or it could be, is Agustin Ramirez actually a catcher at this point? Where's your head at generally with him? And what's this Rule 5 selection telling you in your gut?
I mean, yeah, you're hoping as a fan that it's timeline rather than catching experience.
Yeah,
he's young. He's 23, which for a catcher is basically 19. So you expect him to get every opportunity to stay at the catching position, and they're going to want to make sure that they give it as good a chance as he can to make it, because that changes the whole way that you construct your roster. If you're looking to build up to a moment, whatever year you want to reel off, having your catcher set and ready is such a huge thing. Like if we think about JT, when we through the last rebuild, you knew at catcher, done, sorted, pick it off, we're fine. And that's kind of what you want to do with catcher, because you don't want to be scrambling from one year to the next, especially for a rebuild. So they're going to want to make sure that they've got their guy. And yeah, you're right. I mean, the very few signings that we have seen over the last couple of days and weeks has been that backup catcher role of like, let's just get 3 or 4 guys in. You're going to need them through spring anyway. Agustin Ramirez is going to, we'll see in spring. He'll get an opportunity to catch in spring. We'll get to see it ourselves. And I think there will be a huge interest in the minor league games when he plays as well. I'll certainly want to be checking it out, because at this point, we know he's not going to be an 80 grade catcher. He's not going to live off that value, but there are some very valuable catchers across the league that simply cannot catch. The Yankees seem to be fantastic at acquiring all these prospects that can't catch but can absolutely mash. So if he can just be, especially when you're talking about a sabermetrics team, having a good defensive catcher is so important. It changes the whole way that your rotation works. And it can cost you, half an ERA across the year. So they're going to want to make sure that he's at least not hurting the team defensively. And then if he can mash, because that's all I ever hear is, he might not be able to catch, but he can really hit. I was like, well, how often do you hear about that prospects? And it never happens. I'm not quite ready to just tick off he's going to be offensively great, because we just don't know until we see it. So that's one thing that I've noticed as I've seen other people talk about him.
Yeah, definitely. The point you make there, and this is, again, Bendix, we know where he's come from, we know the organization and how they approach things. And we've seen that play out in the way that he's approached guys that as they enter ARB, you know what happens. And so we know the model. He's following the model. Like, there's a Rays playbook. Bendix helped to create that to a degree, and he's implemented the same book with maybe a few sprinkles of his own. I don't know. But the one thing from a catching standpoint and the Rays is that they absolutely prioritize defense first over anything else linked to catcher. And that's what, as soon as this deal went down, knowing the Rays, knowing how valuable they see the defensive aspects of a catcher, I was certain at that point that the Marlins were, Bendix wasn't acquiring Agustin Ramirez to be a starting catcher. I don't think he's ever, you're already seeing the way his position is, I think, demonstrated on the roster. It's, catcher, DH maybe, I don't know. However, it's, it's already telling us. We already know And so my gut feel is, it's from Ramirez's perspective, is it's unlikely to ever be a big league catcher. And I think Bendix already knows that. And he's acquired him for the stick, and that's fine. I'm all good with acquiring him for the stick. Let's be the stick. And the stick plays at first base, at third, DH. Who cares? Who cares? So I'm really interested on that. But I do think that catching situation, I don't think he will ever be the Marlins catcher. It's just my gut feel. I know how the Rays prioritize defensive ability, and I don't think he will ever be there. And I think they will always prioritize that, which is interesting. So there's been a lot that's gone on, and I wrote various things down in advance of this episode. Wanted to touch on a couple of them. We've got some new play-by-play guys, which I think is very interesting from a fan's perspective, because these are the guys and the voices that we hear daily for 6 months. So, Paul Severino his contract wasn't renewed. Contract had expired, wasn't renewed, and he's now being replaced by former Marlins radio guy, stepping up to the TV now in Kyle Seelaf. So Kyle Seelaf getting his shot as play-by-play TV. So congrats to Kyle for that. I mean, he's really worked his way through the organization. I mean, not quite like Bendix, but in some ways, like Bendix joined young, worked his way through. Kind of Kyle Seelaf's doing the same thing. It wouldn't shock me if Kyle Seelaf is the Marlins closer in a couple of seasons' time, the way his progression's carrying on. But, congrats to Kyle. He has a very energetic style, I would say, particularly when things are going well or there's action. And so I'm very interested to see how that carries through and translates to the TV. But, I think it's an interesting hire, though, right? And I think, it's interesting that the Marlins have kept someone in-house and promoted them to the big screen, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think at a certain point you'll have to see, or you might not, we'll see how it goes. But I would imagine that there'll be a softening from the way he broadcasts from the radio to the TV. You've got to do a lot of legwork when you're on the radio.
Yeah.
To give that excitement. When you can see it, you don't need to be as effusive. So I'm interested to see how it transfers. I'm really happy to see that Tommy Hutton and Rod Allen are both returning to quite sizable roles with the team, because I really obviously like them, and they are fan favourites, especially Tommy Hutton, obviously an absolute legend in this market. Rod Allen's getting there for me as well. He's really good. So yeah, and Ken, it was strange because they went from Geff in radio broadcast, and that affected me, because, as you said, it was a case of these other voices that show you baseball. You learn baseball through these voices. And Geff was that guy for me. So when he was replaced, I struggled with that transition. And it's nothing to do with Kyle or the way he broadcasts. It's just he wasn't the guy that I've listened to for 20 years. And that you're never going to be able to replace that. The new guy for the radio as well, I'm going to blank on his name, but I've seen some clips of him calling games. And I think he's a strange return back to a more, by the books, play-by-play guy. Also, you could almost imagine that voice from the 80s calling the game. So
it's a classic baseball radio voice, I think, isn't it? It's a good call. I mean, he's not an old guy. Clearly, it's Jack McMullen, but his style is a throwback almost, isn't it? I think, which is kind of cool too. Yeah,
he's really interesting. I'm going to say I'm interested to see how he works that through. But yeah, it's just more change for change's sake. Sometimes it feels like with the Marlins, but hopefully at some point they'll settle on something, because baseball's baseball broadcasting is that job that you look at other teams. You've got guys there that have done it for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and fans' whole life of baseball could be told by just that one voice. And for a team like the Marlins that struggle with transition and rebuilds, which is the way that the team's going to continue to be run, we know this. They brought in a GM that can specifically do that role. Having some kind of set it in concrete, what you're getting with your broadcasters. I wish they had settled with the guys that they had when they started, but obviously changes happened, and I do hope that at a certain point they stick with one guy and we'll run with that.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it seems just par for the course, really, where when a rebuild starts, that includes the booth, seemingly. Like, everything is up for grabs and everything is there to be adjusted and tweaked and changed. And I guess it just shows, like, just how many elements that, like, Peter Bendix and this whole approach, like, just how much goes into it, how much thought process seemingly goes into this. Because, frankly, from, like, just thinking the TV aspect, Paul Severino, in my opinion, did a really nice job. And I don't think anyone was deeply crying out that, man, Paul Severino is struggling to connect. And I think actually Seb really kind of grew on people over the years, actually. And so it just again shows that the Marlins and Peter Bendix, everything is being changed. That kind of blends into, we haven't really followed the rundown in any depth because, well, the rundown would have been too long if I try to list out everything we wanted to speak about on episode 1. But, we've got we had the FanFest on Friday, which by the Marlins numbers anyway reported, there's around 18,000 people attended FanFest, which feels like a really great turnout. There were a few things that were like headlining the day. One of which headed into it, just speaking about change, was, the City Connect jerseys. Obviously, the Sugar King jerseys we heard were being retired. And so there was, the expectation of a new City Connect jersey. And again, from a fan base perspective, we love jerseys. We love the merch. And the feeling was heading into FanFest, hey, there's going to be a launch of these City Connects. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And all we ended up with was Christina Di Nicola, I think, launching the fact that the Marlins were going to wear them for the first time on May the 5th or 6th or whenever it might be, which to me smells like we were hoping to launch them, but actually they weren't quite ready for some reason, because you can't hype up the City Connects linked to FanFest and then for them not to be there. So something's clearly broke down there. But that aside, mate, from a City Connect perspective, I'm expecting a high degree of flair actually to come out with these jerseys, mate. I think, this is Miami, this is South Florida. Like, these jerseys, they need to be representative. And I'm expecting something similar. I mean, the Sugar Kings, I think they nailed those ones. And I know they've retired them, but I'm expecting them to come out with something equally like, where everyone's like, okay, these are a top 5 City Connect. Was the general consensus of the previous ones. Can they do it again, do you think, with a top 5?
Yeah, you hope so. Like, you say top 5. I would say top 3. I'd say top 1. I think they were the best out there.
I agree with that.
Look, don't be wrong. Once they retired it meant I could pick up some more stuff on a sale, so I'm not too angry about that. But I think,
nice polo shirt, that, by the way, nice polo.
That jersey for me was one of the, and it's a pretty sad thing to say for a baseball team, but it was probably one of the biggest wins this organization's had over this period of time. So to change from it so quickly, I mean, you could be a little bit pessimistic and say, New Jersey means more money, but yeah, I do hope that they give it a bit of Miami flair, because that's part and parcel of what the location is, and this team really should be leaning into that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to give the Marlins specifically a slight pass. Like, the thing is with the world of misinformation, you never quite know what's real. But I feel like I read somewhere that Nike specifically had a shelf life associated to these City Connects, and it was like a 4 or 5 year window, whatever it might be. And then at that point, they have to be refreshed for commercial reasons, obviously. And so I feel like this might be a Nike-driven element rather than the Marlins, because I think a few of the similar ones at a similar time have also been retired as well. I can't remember who. Maybe the Yockies. The Yockies. Who were the Yockies? The Rockies one, I think, was maybe also. But nevertheless, it felt like the Marlins were close to launching that, and then they've had to slightly peel it back, and now we'll maybe just see some I don't know, some clips. But I mean, think it back, mate. Though that City Connect drop, I mean, Cooper Loop, boy, oh boy. I mean, there's a lot of images I have when I think of those City Connects, but Coop absolutely pimping them out. I mean, it's one of the iconic Marlins images. I think. I mean, how did he? I mean, it was a swag overload with Coop in that City Connect, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's to me, I've still got that picture saved as one of my favourites, just because it's so good. It's so out of character, and bless him, he might be a really super cool guy, but God help him, like the photos don't do him any favours.
No, absolutely, for sure. The other aspect, mate, and I feel like this will connect better with you. You're a long-term fan, and there's a lot of long-standing fans, Marlins fans. And I think there's always been this animosity towards the organization about how they have recognized the past, the Marlins history, and for whatever reason, because of ownership changes and the need to change, it's meant that the Marlins, who've won 2 World Series in their history, and have had some great players, it's never felt like they've actually been able to do that right. And there's no retired jerseys. And, you know, what we saw last year, I mean, we had all these like history clips and elements in TVs, and then the TVs broke down and weren't maintained. And there's all sorts of hoo-ha about it. But it feels like the Marlins made a really positive move at FanFest with this new, you know, Marlins legend aspect, and the new, you know, the first guys entered into effectively the Marlins Hall of Fame, which, you know, of course, like, you know, Conine's going to be in there, and, you know, the names that you expect to be in there were in there, which was great. So from your standpoint, it's unfair for me to talk about it, like, and really lean into it, because these weren't guys that I followed. I didn't follow the club back then. So for you, you know, long-standing fan, just your take on how the Marlins, Bruce Sherman, approached this, and just your overall sense of, like, have they got it right?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely 100% perfect, the way that they've done this, because every new owner isn't going to want to start harping on about what an old owner did, because it just puts a shine on, oh, they achieved more than we've currently achieved. Before I mention Castillo and Conine, I just want to mention that they also added Jim Leland and Jack McKeon, the 2 managers of the teams that won the World Series. And I think I'm really glad that they did that now, so that it's not a post-death situation, not to be too morbid, but Jim Leland's 80, Jack McKeon's in his mid-90s. Like, if it was a case of, if you don't do this now, then you've wasted an opportunity. So I'm glad that they've done that. They've given them their flowers, given them a day to celebrate, and a day for us to celebrate them, because they were both massive, absolutely massive, more than you can imagine. You know, we talk now about what's the value of a manager, but Jim Leland and Jack McKeon were, you know, proper managers. They were the chief of the team. So I'm glad that they did that. I'm glad that they added Castillo as well as Conine. Conine obviously gets the Mr. Marlin moniker, and for good reason. He was here for both of the championships. But Castillo, if you look at it, if you look at all the stats, plate appearances, at bats, hits, runs, he is literally one, and then there's a couple of 2s and 3s. He is, you know, he's the most prolific Marlins player inside of a Marlins jersey, which is, with this organization, a hell of a thing to be able to claim. So I think all 4 guys were pretty much 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D of who they should have added. So this is a huge win for the organization in my eyes, as far as doing something right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the sense that I had, was well done. Like, Bruce, the Marlins organization, it was overdue, and the way they've approached it, they nailed it. They've nailed this. And we haven't said that about the Marlins organization we haven't said it since the City Connect drop, probably. I mean, actually, that's unfair. that 2023 roster, I think they nailed that too, which was a lot of fun to track. But yeah, they haven't seemingly done a lot of things right by the fan base and what the fans wanted to see. And I think for this one, they've absolutely nailed it, which is great. One final topic, player, discussion point, just to briefly touch on. I think it's important to call it out. It's on the rundown for those that are watching. Eury Perez, obviously with FanFest, and there was a media day prior to that. So, some of the media guys got up close with the guys, started to get some news, some nuggets. Eury Perez sharing that he's been throwing. I think he's thrown multiple bullpens already. I feel like 7's the number top of my head. And effectively he's saying he's feeling good, and he can see a pathway to him being, back, ish in and around the All-Star break, which, listen, firstly is super encouraging. The timeline feels right, really. I think, when it happened, just before the season started last time around, you get the sense, okay, at least a year until you're back, plus then, half a season to work your way back. So the timeline to me feels like as expected, but encouraging that he's on that pathway, similar to Sandy. I feel like Sandy was slightly ahead, to be honest. But, the interesting thing with Eury, and this is where my head's at with him, is how the Marlins handle this in 2025. And I do think that is very interesting, because when Eury says, I'm going to be back where, I think is going to be interesting, because frankly, our expectations are the Marlins are going to be nowhere near contention. During this podcast in coming weeks, we will talk about a situation where the Marlins could be relevant. But let's just assume at this point, Shaun, that the Marlins, by the All-Star break, have again sold off any expired, Jesus Sanchez may be gone, a couple of other guys could be gone, bullpen arms gone, they're on track to win 60 to 70. At that juncture, does it make more sense to leave Eury Perez away from the big leagues, just, low-key, just working on what he's working on, and he comes back strong for 26? Or would you prefer for him to be, accelerated into the big league club and finish the season with the Marlins?
I think the natural progression of a Tommy John surgery returnee as young as he is that he'll get some starts at the minor league level. I think 3, 4, maybe 5.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think back to how the Marlins played it with Jose Fernandez, and I'm pretty certain that's what happened with him. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, the main thing that you're going to want to see is, I don't want to see the word setback at any point in an article about him. I think having him return, being healthy, and I think you're right, timeline-wise, All-Star break-ish is about right. Also, again, 60 to 75 innings pitched. I don't think there's any need to how you could fit that into the rest of the season at that point. I mean, even if you want to talk about bringing him back up for September and having him pitch, final 4 or 5 starts at the major league level, I think there is no hurry. The only hurry that you would want to see as a fan, or I want to see personally, is to get to that number, get to that 60 to 75, because you're talking about progression. If he only gets 40 innings this year, then next year they're only going to go up to 75 to 100. If you want to see the point of when his team is looking to return to some sort of winning, you want Eury to be, and he probably will be, the number one ace on that team at that point, because someone might not be here, and you want to see him at the maximum of his innings, 150 to 175, whatever the new non-Sandy number one ace innings limit is in the modern MLB. So he needs to get his innings in this year so that they can ramp him up to next year, so that they can ramp him up to next year and have him lead the team. So yeah, give me 60 to 75. Don't show me setbacks, and we'll be good.
Yeah, that is going to be a very interesting storyline to follow. I think a lot of Marlins fans will have heard what Eury Perez said, and they would then assume, great, Eury Perez is going to be back with the Marlins after the All-Star break. And I don't think that's certain. I can certainly see a situation where Eury Perez might be back pitching, but not for the Marlins specifically. They want to, and the other interesting wrinkle, and decision maybe that the Marlins have is with Eury specifically, what injured list does he end up on now? Do they option him and then put him on the minor league injured list for until the All-Star break or even beyond? I think that's another interesting decision that they can make. Do they want to burn an option to protect the service time that he would accrue, I think, on the major league injured list? And so I think, for Eury Perez, like from a Marlins standpoint, it really must be painful to have his cheapest cost service time evaporating away on an injured list. And the reality is they can option Eury Perez. They can put him on the minor league injured list, which won't then accrue the service time at the big league level. And so I think that's an interesting wrinkle. We'll see, where they go with that. That impacts Eury Perez in terms of his financial aspect, which again is another wrinkle, which does make me think, at this juncture, could there be an extension type situation that could happen with Eury Perez, where actually some of this starts to go away? Eury Perez ends up actually getting paid a bit more now while he's injured, while he's rehabbing, and this year it doesn't become a wash. But from a Marlins business standpoint right now, I would be sending Eury Perez down to the minor leagues. I would be putting him on a minor league IL and preserving that season effectively of service control rather than just burning it. There's no need to burn that. So I think it's an interesting business decision that will come up, will impact Eury Perez. It is a business at the end of the day, and so he will have to, deal with that if indeed that is the case. But with those types of decisions going on, I do wonder if that opens up an extension conversation, perhaps, but maybe it felt like it disappeared 18 months ago. UK GOAT Shaun Barrett. Firstly, mate, thank you. It's great to be back. How did it feel, mate? 4 months away. And you're hungover to hell because you were attacking the Super Bowl like, no one attacks the Super Bowl. So how was that for you, mate? First episode back.
My eyes might give it away. They're not quite as clear as they usually be. I'm glad to be back, Pete. I mean, I wouldn't quite say it's like getting back on a bike after some time off, but I am looking forward to talking baseball with you for this year and beyond, I hope. And as I always say, this is a conversation I'd happily have with you anytime, and we just happen to record it.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. So I'm pumped. It's great to be back. First episode. I mean, that's 53 minutes in. So for everyone that's still listening, of which it'll be I hope you've enjoyed episode 1 of Marlins Uncorked, the launch episode. It is available everywhere you get your pods. It's available on YouTube, etc., etc. So it will be available everywhere. For those that are watching on YouTube and then worrying about the podcast version, it may take a day or two to kind of funnel its way through into podcast channels, as there's like various checks that go on and making sure it's a legit show. I don't know. So please do bear with me in the next day or two. We're then going to get into our cadence of subscriber-only content. So it's going to be a very similar format, but it's going to be subscribers only. Next week, we'll be back probably on a Monday, and that will be the free episode. We'll play around with that, but generally it'll probably be around that day. We're then going to have subscriber-only content available via Patreon. If you want that, you want those episodes, then go and subscribe there. It's a monthly fee, recurring, cancel anytime. If you get bored, you don't like it, it's not for you, so be it. Nothing personal. But I want this show to be awesome. And I think having a membership aspect to it will make it awesome. So with that being said, guys, thanks for joining us on Marlins Uncorked. There's going to be 2 more episodes this week, at least. Maybe I can convince Shaun to come back for one of them at least. But there'll probably be a solo pod. And also we'll start to roll in various other guests. We've got tons of guys absolutely chomping at the bit to get involved. So, guys, it is baseball season. The NFL is in the bin. It's baseball season. And we are full steam ahead with Marlins Uncorked, following this Marlins group very, very closely. We're looking forward to it. See you very, very soon.